unfortunately is not feeling well and is on bed rest. So he told me that a few minutes ago that he can't be here. And Scott also sent me an email and said that he was not able to join us this evening. So this is the February 17th meeting of the Broadband Completion Task Force. I'm Mark Howell, the chair, and I'll do the roll call. So Gordon Brockway.
Present.
And Scott Hopkinson, as I mentioned, is not going to be with us tonight. David Hessel is also not going to be with us. Gail Heyer.
Present.
And myself, Mark Howell. So we have a quorum. And I'll just note, so I know, Gordon, you were the clerk last time. And I'm anticipating that we may want to sort of do check-ins tonight and maybe not too much else, just based on I don't want to get too far out ahead of David but do I have a volunteer for clerk?
I'll do it.
Okay, thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
And
I haven't gotten to my notes are on my laptop and they're not in the form to actually share with you guys yet.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I know that I saw that they weren't distributed, so I was going to kind of skip right over that. Just in terms of future meetings, or along lines of the chair's report, we are scheduled to meet next week. I know that's school vacation week. Is that a problem for either of you?
No, I think I'll be around that night.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting once you get out of the school like me, sometimes these things kind of sneak up on you. The FinCom hearing is on the radar, so I'm anticipating that we'll meet on Thursdays, except for the 17th, when we would probably want to be present for the light board hearing. I think the light board rep is usually going to be there anyway, so I'm expecting that we will meet on the.
I'm sorry, say that again, Mark. Something about, is that related to the FinCom meeting or?
Yeah, the FinCom has the enterprise budget hearing scheduled for Thursday, March 17th.
Oh, March 17th. Okay.
At 7 p.m. So that would normally be a meeting evening for us, and I'm anticipating that we may even want to prepare something to say about the budget prep at that point, but we'll cross that bridge when we get a little closer to it. Also on the topic of future meetings, I did attend the chair's breakfast yesterday, and probably the main note from that that's useful to understand is we are meeting on Zoom per the emergency authorization that the state has given, and that is expected to be extended until July 15th. It would have expired on April 1st. So that's before the House and Senate. So to the extent that we want to, or it makes sense to do, we could continue to meet at Zoom. Concord, as you probably know, dropped the indoor mask mandate requirement yesterday. So we do appear to be coming out, or potentially opening up a little bit more, and that I think creates the opportunity for an in-person meeting if we're so inclined, as well as if we want to do any kind of public hearing or something like that. So we should probably talk about that a little bit. Also going into the future, any thoughts from anyone on that right now?
I'll just say that if we did meet someplace in person, I think it would be helpful to have some kind of monitor, some kind of large enough monitor that everybody can see, look at one thing. And that's kind of the biggest thing we'd be losing.
Yeah.
By moving away from Zoom. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I mean, it's certainly convenient to be able to just walk down the hallway and attend the meeting. So there's a little bit of overhead, but I
Yeah.
think that meeting is awfully useful too. So
Right. I think especially as we get a little bit closer and want to sort of hash things out a little more dynamically, I think
yeah,
it is worth it to think about when that will fit into our schedule. But in the meantime, we'll plan to, kind of continue in the vein we are. To that note, I'll just mention that besides Terry Ackerman and Carlin Reed, who have been really stalwart regular attendees of this meeting, Jason Bulger, the CIO of the town, has joined us. And I spoke with, hi, Jason, it's quite glad you're here. I spoke with him a few days ago, and there's a couple things to know. One is that Greg Marcinek has left the employ of the town, I guess. I can't characterize what the status of that was, but as of Friday, and Jason has assumed the responsibilities for the broadband initiative at this stage of the game, in addition to his CIO duties. So having sat in that seat, I'm not sure congratulations are in order, but congratulations. Thank you for being here. And so we talked a little bit about the things that we were kind of looking to accomplish. And he asked me to, relay what we were looking for in so far in the effort right now from staff. And, so I forwarded the data request that you had sent, Gordon, as well as the correspondence that I'd had so far with the folks that are in charge of the roads program. So those are a couple of things that are outstanding. The other thing I noticed, and I did drop a quick note about this, is at one point there was going to be a monthly follow-up by the light board on broadband installations and backlog, and that was a kind of an issue that was of concern, and I don't remember seeing that at the most recent light board meeting, and maybe not even the one before that. So I would suggest that would be a good thing to bring, for the next light board. It's obviously not too important for us right here, although we have been kind of looking at it. That kind of brings me to one further thought I had on that since I wrote that, is that one of the areas for ARPA that seems to be going forward is this notion of looking at lost revenues. And it occurred to me that with respect to broadband installations, one could make the case pretty easily that there was an interruption in the level of broadband installations, and therefore new revenue that would have occurred absent the pandemic. And so it might be interesting to sort of see what if the normal course and speed had taken place through 2020 and 2021, I think the broadband subscriptions would be in a different place. And I don't know exactly how that has all, is going to shake out at the ARPA funding level. But if you haven't taken a look at it, the select board had a pretty substantive discussion, and I would even say a small shift in direction about how they're thinking about what the disbursement of ARPA funding might be going forward. So there might be some value in making a case along that line as well, as a way of seeding some of the work that's going forward. So
wait, so are you suggesting that they seem a little bit less interested in broadband now?
I'll categorize it this way, and then if Terry wants to correct me or add anything, I'll invite her to. The discussion at the select board meeting looked at all of the different project proposals that were brought forward on the January 31st meeting of the select board, but then they went into a discussion where I think it was mostly Matt Johnson's kind of idea, but they were also noting that under the rules of the disbursement, because of the amounts involved, the town could more or less declare all of the 5.64 million as falling under, I think, a $10 million cap for lost revenue, and then cycle it through the sort of, normal budgetary processes that would, and aim it at things that were both actual lost revenue and funneled into projects through that mechanism. And it seemed to me that the select board was kind of getting oriented towards doing something like that, rather than plucking specific projects that weren't going forward or might not have gone forward otherwise. So it's still, I think, very much an open discussion, but staff was looking at that, and in that, while I was watching that, I started to think about, well, what has the pandemic impact actually been on the broadband business? And it occurred to me that the drop off, virtually the standstill in installations that we see in the data from 2019, 2020 and 2021 would, possibly qualify as, certainly it's a, there's a distinct, the business was growing at a pretty good clip, and then it wasn't.
Yep.
So another thing along the lines of ARPA that came to my attention is, I don't know if I'm gonna get these words right. There's, and I don't know if this is additional money or just one category, but no, that's not it. Like climate resilience, I think, like climate change and resilience is one reason to use the money. And it seems to me that the Concord's Lights undergrounding effort is directly related to climate resilience, because every time there's a storm and the trees fall down and they got to deal with the overhead wires, I just thought that should be, raised with the people who do budgets for undergrounding. That maybe this is an opportunity to speed up the undergrounding effort.
Yeah.
I've asked the question. I don't have super strong feelings about this, but I've asked in light board meetings a number of times if we could just get the project done, because it's on a path right now to take 100 years.
Yeah.
Wait, no, 50 years, I guess. There's 115 miles of road, and I think we've done about half of them.
Yeah.
And we only do a mile at a time. We do $1 million worth of work when we acquire $1 million. So actually, it may be 100 miles, 100 years. Here's the point: is that any project that gets stretched out gets more expensive. And if you can concentrate, that's actually one of the insights they have about public works, building new train systems and so forth. If you can get it done really quickly, then that can actually lower the overall cost. But we'd have to borrow money in order to do that. We'd have to borrow a fair amount of money too. So I don't think that anybody's really going to want to do that. But honestly, I think if you want to get it done, you might as well just do it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that undergrounding could go hand in hand with broadband installation in places where it's not there. So
yeah, and I think it's both of those thoughts are consistent with the fact that as we sort of look at what we want to put in the report, illuminating the circumstances and the conditions that exist, and then making suggestions about what the programmatic response to those conditions are is a good piece of work, because I think it helps boards like the Light Board or budgeting authorities consider what the options are, because there is the extreme of continue to let it take 100 years to do it. I think if we really looked at what is going on in the underground program, we would recognize that it really doesn't ever intend to underground the entire system. As a system which is has some denser areas like the town centers and some pretty rural areas towards, generally towards the outskirts in the northern part of town. Undergrounding in rural areas isn't typically done in the same way that undergrounding in urban or suburban areas is. You don't have to dig up sidewalks. It's often done kind of along the side margins of roads, not typically along the side margins of New England roads that have loose stone walls and all kinds of other things. But there's sort of different approaches, and the maintenance costs do vary. And while I do understand the resilience argument for putting everything underground, I also think that there is a cost benefit to that's
So
worth weighing.
I asked a related question, and it was like, well, are you prioritizing? And the answer is yes. But if you envision the electric distribution network as a tree, all coming back to a single node, right?
Mhm.
That node ought to be underground, and the branches that it connects to should be underground.
Mhm.
And whenever you have an opportunity to underground something, you should start at the beginning of that tree. In other words, every dollar that you spend on it should benefit the highest number of residents and businesses.
Yeah.
And that would be a prioritization scheme, which, according to what you just said, would deprioritize some of those rural areas where a single undergrounding project would only benefit a small number.
Yeah, and I think that as a practical matter, most of the core of the system is in fact already underground.
Well, I'll tell you what, I live in West Concord, and
Yeah.
not that long ago, there was an accident on Main Street that knocked out West Concord. And it was right after it came up underground, and it got onto a telephone pole, and the telephone pole got knocked over, and that was that.
There are those situations. Bridges, for example, are, and railroad crossings, of which we have many in Concord, are places where often, something that's underground right up to that point suddenly has to go overhead or get suspended underneath some structure or something, because that's a more practical way to do that. Both good points, though. I was expanding a little bit on what I was thinking about with the potential uses of the ARPA funding, and I realized also that the capability to underground in more rural areas, or the service loops to houses that need to be underground, the directional boring in particular, and using a device called the ditch switch, which are both kind of, let's call them lower cost, higher speed ways of undergrounding than, dig a 2-foot deep trench and put in plastic pipes and then, pull cables through, are also options that might be on the table for investigation that would lead to lower cost deployment and therefore, more coverage, while, getting some of the benefits that Gail was talking about, which is, better resilience, or simply fitting in to the existing underground bylaw.
You got to really know where you're cutting, though. It's dig safe, right? So just the fact that you can move really quickly with a ditch switch, that's only one step in a pretty complicated process.
Yes. The reason I was thinking about it, though, was if we're thinking about, some capital program that comes in with ARPA, just the capital expense of buying that piece of equipment and, training people to do it, if that is the kind of thing that represents the ability to step function the capabilities, and then, push forward a little bit better. As far to my knowledge, the light plant doesn't have either a directional boring machine or a ditch switch. I'm sure they don't have a ditch switch, or they didn't. I'm not sure about the directional boring machine. I think they may not have that either. Okay, so let me just let's pause there for a moment. So I mentioned the broadband staffing changes, and I was just going to invite Jason to sort of introduce himself and maybe give us a little bit more information about how he sees things going forward, and if he has any questions that he'd like to ask the task force for a discussion. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you. So I did want to come tonight and say hello to everyone and introduce myself. I know Gordon from many of the Light Board meetings, but it's nice to see everyone here. And I had a good conversation with Mark this week, and I had a good conversation with Carlin this week as well. So, you know, I am in this role on an interim basis while I work with Dave and Carrie, the town manager, to come up with a longer term plan for broadband. So, you know, but at this point, I did want to come to the meeting and find out, well, first communicate the fact that I want to do whatever I can to support the task force and provide information that I think, you know, will be valuable to the aim and for your goals, because the data, I think, from what I've seen, would be really useful and should be readily available. And you know, the things you guys talk about in your meetings are things that I support 100%. And, you know, I want to also start trying to be more out there, engaged and transparent with the operations of broadband so that people are aware of what's going on, what the long-term plans are, and that they have a voice and a hand in what goes on. I was telling Mark that I thought, you know, the town was very clear when broadband started that they supported this. And I think it's good at a regular interval to kind of check in with the town and make sure that the short and long-term goals of broadband are still matching what the residents want. This really is a resource for the town. And you know, I want to see that input flowing in, and I want to see the information flowing out. So as I told Mark, and I'll tell you all now, anything we can do for information, you know, I don't want this. I see you guys as an asset and, you know, contributors to our goals. So I'm just here to do whatever I can to help. And Mark did forward me some information, and I'll go through that. And I'll also see where things were left with the previous requests, and then I'll follow up on those. And you know, I'll try to attend most of the meetings if I can. If not, you know, feel free to email me as you had in the past with broadband. But yeah, I'm appreciative that you're having me here and allowing me the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions for Jason?
I'll just say, hey, thanks a lot. And you know, one thing that I think is important to all of us here on this task force is that the town of Concord ought to be a great place to work. And so anything we can do to make that make your experience as an employee of the town better is great for us. And hopefully that'll help you too if you're trying to hire a replacement or whatever. It's all copacetic.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's definitely one of my goals as well for my staff. And you know, we have a great group of people in broadband. I've spoken with them all at length individually and as a group multiple times, and I'm very optimistic and excited about, you know, what's possible, and looking forward to working with Dave, the Light Board, and you know, the Select Board and Carrie, and figuring out a long-term direction for the department, the division, I should say.
If it turns out that there are some resources that would really make a difference at this point, you know, this task force, I think, would be a really great platform for getting the message out and helping pushing for whatever it is we identify as being, you know, blocking resources. So
Right, I agree. And I think that the data that's being requested, and I know Carlin has had an ask recently too, it would be great to have a place to post that and let people know, because some of these questions are intriguing and they beg a conversation about what, you know, policy might be, whether it's for low income households or just finding availability and figuring out what the barriers to subscription are. And you know, I've already talked to the CSR team, and we have a few meetings planned to find out how we can capture more data about our customers and what's working, what's not working, so that we can, you know, improve the service any way we can.
Yeah, we had a really good conversation, and Jill Moonheron came to one of our meetings early, and she provided the both the initial versions of the spreadsheets that I sent back to you, as well as a map that's linked on the task force's webpage that indicates the broadband availability. And it seems to me that one of the ways that we might really usefully leave behind an artifact that can genuinely assist the department in planning and executing on this is to try and see whether there's a way that we could use the investigations that we're doing in the information that we're gathering on particular situations and feed that right back into the GIS system so that it's available. I think that will, I'm not that familiar with what Carlin was looking for from a PEG access perspective, but it does seem to me that augmenting the data in that way would be useful. I'm not sure to what extent NISC might also have some useful data on telecommunications, because they have a GIS module that I'm not familiar with. But
Mark, what was that acronym that you used?
Oh, NISC is the utility billing system that the electric departments do. So there's an engineering layer that can be used for outages and other service planning in there. So I believe when it was being implemented, it was primarily electric, and I don't think it had too much for the telecom side, but it's useful nonetheless, because it does sort of link to the customer billing accounts that are connected to the telecom facility. So that might be another source of data. I believe that what we were looking at was primarily what we call base layer information. It's sort of the common data that the whole town uses, all the town departments use for parcels and mostly assessing data, as well as an overlay of the fiber network itself, which came from another source that was used for fiber engineering, if I recognize it. And what my suggestion, just to make it crystal clear, is that we try and take some of the analysis that we've been doing by looking at this and say, okay, if there's a street, Stacy Circle comes to mind because that's the one we've been talking about for the customer that doesn't have fiber, somehow being able to create an annotation inside the GIS system that says there is no fiber on Stacy Circle because, and whatever that code is, it's direct buried underground and no plan. And that's the conversation that I'm hoping to deepen a little bit by talking with both Public Works Engineering about what they think about with the road program. And I think that the Light Plan Engineering Department may be involved in it. My sense is that right there could tell us something, because if the roads people and the electric people are there, but there's nobody there from the telecom side, that could explain some of the reason that the telecom needs are not getting prioritized, and everybody concludes that it's okay to just pave the road over and move on. And I'm not saying that's not the right answer. It might in fact be the right answer sometimes, but I also think that those residents, deservedly should get a response of when and if they're ever going to, when is it going to be time, and under what conditions might they actually get broadband? Do they literally have to wait for the electric system under their street to fail? That could be a long time. I hope it's a long time. Okay. So those are, I guess those are my general updates, and to some extent we've kind of covered 3, 4, and 5 on the agenda too, although not quite in the right order. So just sticking on those topics, I haven't had any direct responses to my communications about setting up things for the road program. So the next thing is going to be, making some phone calls and asking people to respond directly. The ask there had been to discuss when it would be a good time to schedule a discussion about how that planning is done, from our information gathering perspective. And so that'll be a next step. And then,
Mark,
yeah,
it might be worth just taking a back of the envelope calculation about the roads program. In a previous meeting, we determined that there's 115 miles of road and 100 have fiber. So that's a 15 miles left to go. Those roads actually are, whether they have fiber or not, actually doesn't really say anything about how badly they need to be paved. So those are not related. The other thing that's not actually necessarily related, but in fact, I think a lot of people think they are, is whether or not there's fiber underground versus whether or not there's electric underground. And the often quoted, I even quoted it once already in this meeting, is that it's like $1 million a mile, and there's a budget that the undergrounding surcharge generates a certain amount of cash every year, and it takes a fair number of years in order to get to $1 million. So whether or not we're actually really talking about splitting those two ideas apart, the fiber and the electric, and saying, hey, even if we can't afford the $1 million a mile, maybe we can afford $80,000 a mile. And if we, and that's actually something to work on. It's like, can people actually embrace that? There may be very good reasons why people would actually prefer to keep them in the same category, because for one thing, it simplifies your work, simplifies your planning, and it simplifies, look, we know what to do. We're going to do an undergrounding. Undergrounding means undergrounding both, blah, 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 but it slows it down. So there's a cost to taking them apart and treating them as separate processes and separate opportunities, and possibly separate costs. Like I said, it's possible that maybe the fiber would be a lot less expensive. So that kind of, these kinds of things, you do it kind of at a town level without actually even looking at the missing streets, and think about, can we actually make that work? And I don't know the answer to it, but if the answer is a maybe or a yes, then we'll have to make some adjustments in the way that people think about things.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of clarify that in the case of the Alfred Circle, which is, I think that's off Madison Drive, as well as Stacy Circle, what we're really talking about in those cases is areas where there already is an underground electric service. So in the undergrounding program that costs $1 million a mile, those will only come up for, in some sense, they're already done from the electric utilities perspective. And the question that I'm raising here is, does that mean that we just say, well, you missed the boat, you can't, it's never going to be done again, or maybe doesn't get done again until some unknown time in the future when something bad happens and they have to dig up the existing underground and do that? Or is there a lane that says, well, yeah, maybe when the road is getting repaved anyway, we go through and just do fiber just because the road is being repaved? Okay. Because once the road is repaved, then there's lots of good reasons not to want to dig up anything in there until something fails. And that's the case that we're doing, which is because there are other places, that where electric utilities and all other utilities are being undergrounded, and that's where it's in. And so far, it's my understanding that on those projects, when that is being done, I think the most recent work was done in the vicinity of the intersection of Cambridge Turnpike and Lexington Road. near the Concord Museum, for example. There was quite a bit of work done over there. There hasn't been any issue with also dealing with the fiber at the same time as the electric utility when that's going on. My concern is that there are places where there isn't an electric project and there isn't likely to be an electric project, and yet there's no fiber. So
Yeah.
it falls to us to when our concern is fiber completion, of under what conditions is that ever going to get done? And that's the central question. Is I just want to know whether that will ever happen.
And the one other back of the envelope calculation, if we take that 80,000 and multiply it by 15 miles, I think
Yeah.
that's $1.2 million.
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, where's an enterprise that generates about that a year gonna come up with that much in capital?
Well, I mean, actually, when we think about it, though, that's it. We've already looked at the budget a couple of weeks ago and discovered that there's $300-ish thousand a year scheduled for starting in a couple of years for fiber installation in the capital plan. So
Yeah,
even a couple of $1 million, that could be a 10-year program or something like that. Now it's probably a 10-year it's probably that cost if you can also push the work along when you're doing other expensive things like repaving a road. But if you're not also doing that, then obviously the costs get higher because you're talking about all of the disruption of digging up the road or digging up part of the road and paving, or are you doing something else? So I think that what's called for is some let's call it creative thinking about what the solutions might be. And maybe it's not one size fits all. In some of the really dense areas or downtown areas, that construction could be orders of magnitude more expensive than that. But in other areas where there's a cul-de-sac that's been built off of like let's say the Virginia Road area, most of those cul-de-sacs went in with direct buried underground and no conduit for fiber. But it's also relatively easier territory because there tends to be a lot of space and it's fairly open. It's not, one would think that you could install fiber in there when it either came up on the road program or maybe even in a project that was designed a little differently. So I think what falls to us is to make the suggestions that here are the areas, and maybe that only covers 6 miles of this. I forgot what the length was. That I calculated the length at some point of the Madison Drive and those little cul-de-sacs off of that. It's barely a mile.
Oh, what you calculated you mean you're talking about Virginia Road in particular?
Yeah, when we
Oh,
yeah, was it like 3,000 feet or something like that?
yeah, something like that. I can actually open that. I'm just waiting for Excel to open and then I'll put it on the screen. This is the same report we've looked at a couple of times before.
And the thing that I've been wondering is, does the fiber have to go in the same path with the electric? I mean, is it possible that the fiber could go off to the side in a shallower ditch-witched area? Is there somewhere I have the policy or the requirement for how deep the fiber needs to go, and I think it's like, I don't want to say it because I might get it wrong, but I don't think it's the same as the electric.
That's exactly the kind of question that we would want to raise. So the specifics, this little group, we call it group 2, I guess.
Of Route 2?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
Madison
Yep.
Drive itself, along with these 3 little spurs off of it, had a total of 6,500 feet. So what's that, about 1.2 miles?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I forgot, Stacy Circle's on here someplace. Stacy Circle and a little bit of off Harrington Avenue is a total of 1,500 feet. So I should move that.
Would this get you, so where's, I thought someone, earlier meeting we were saying was 15 miles.
That's if you add
Well,
up all of these groups.
So if you add up everything,
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
81,000 is 15 miles. 81,000 feet is 15 miles.
Cool.
Right. that's the sort of missing thing. But clearly some of these projects, I mean, you know, whatever, Pheasant Lane, it looks like you know 400 feet. So some, which also goes to say that probably, especially if the equipment was owned, or to Gail's point, some engineering standards were put in place that said, yes, it is okay to, you know, go down the side of the road, or when it's being repaved, dig an 18-inch trench and, you know, put the fiber in, and only the fiber, or maybe install a couple of flex conduits for communications. You could get a lot done with a focused program on this. I think it just, you know, and it picks up on something that I observed when when they were talking about the evolution of the roads program itself this year. The Public Works Department is looking at a variety of different treatments. Like basically the previous, you know, prior to this year, the treatments were sort of full depth reconstruction, or, you know, you put down that tar stuff to crack sealing, and they didn't have anything in between that was, you know, a small amount of reconditioning to keep the pavement high. And what I'm saying is this is sort of analogous to that from a fiber perspective. If there were some programs that said, hey, we recognize that we don't have an optimal electric grid, but we know where it is, and we can put something in beside it so that it, you know, it becomes, when we're working on that street anyway, and get it done. And then, you know, maybe at some point in the future, whenever it becomes necessary to redo the electric grid, maybe something else is done. But in the meantime, some potential customers are served. Okay. So I think we're all pretty much on the same page in that. I think what needs to happen next is a little bit more discussion with town staff about what the possibilities are, and then, you know, kind of writing up the options, as it were, that might present themselves. And then I think once we kind of have those written, we'll be able to decide what to include in the report. Okay. Does anybody have anything else they want to say about ARPA or that infrastructure proposal? I have a little bit more on that. So I already mentioned one of the ideas that I had, which is whether or not there should be some consideration to lost revenue for broadband based on the installations that were not done. The second idea that I had, and this I think was consistent with some of the suggestions from the meeting, is some type of affordable broadband service fund. So the idea would be, we don't offer an internet essentials program similar to the investor-owned utilities. And I would say that, you know, part of that is that we simply haven't, and another part of it is that it wouldn't be that helpful to have such a program if it turns out that the people that could qualify for the program, for example, people living in affordable or senior housing, can't get the service because there's no fiber to provide the service over. So it seems to me that a proposal in the broadband area, in the ARPA area, might be to create some kind of funding to enable qualified, customers that might otherwise qualify for a program like Internet Essentials to essentially apply for it, have the construction done, and get access to the program for low or nearly no cost. Because somebody who needs $10 a month internet service is not going to be able to spend $7,000 for you to give them $10,000 internet service or some number like that. Even maybe a few $100s is unaffordable. So it seems like there needs to be some mechanism to enable that, and maybe that could be a place that could be seeded, and then some funding mechanism either from I'd almost feel more comfortable. I know I don't want to beat it at a horse about the payment in lieu of franchise, but in some ways I'd feel more comfortable if broadband was budgeted to pay into such a fund rather than, sort of cross-subsidizing some other function. Not that the other function is not deserving. But that was one idea. I mentioned already earlier this notion of capital equipment that would enable lower costs or lower cost undergrounding in those areas, because underground, either service loops or lack of fiber in underground areas is one of the main inhibitors. So we talked about inhibitors to installation that tends to really scare people off. It creates, a headwind that is often, the customer simply walks away and says, I'm not going to fund that.
Could I bring Carlin, Reed and I got, where I was CC'd, it was actually Carlin's email thread, a conversation about eligibility that for low income. Carlin, do you want to relate that conversation?
Sure. Carlin Reed, 83 Woodsend, just very briefly. Thank you, Gordon. I had asked for some information from Carol Hilton of the Light Plant. She's a customer service chief, and to find out how many people are participating in the electric residential assistance program. There are 176 currently.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked her also, of that 176, how many also participate in the town's broadband? The answer is 1.
Mm-hmm.
I also asked her if she knew what the rationale was. She said that don't know, perhaps the cost of the broadband, perhaps access to broadband. So that was the purpose, and that was the information that I had asked, and that Jason had mentioned earlier, was trying to find some information about the number of people who are already income qualified under the electric residential rate service program, who currently also participate in broadband, to see what kind of a pool would be available if a low income program were to be offered through the residential assistance program. That's it. Gordon, did I get everything? I think so.
I think so.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Carlin. Vince, did you want to add something?
Yes, the new version of that subsidy from the government, it used to be called the Emergency Broadband Bill, but it's now called, I think, the American Continuation Broadband or something like that. I think it's ACP, but it provides $30 per month as a discount on the current bill, for internet service, and cable for that matter, of anybody that applies for it, basically. So $30 per month times approximately, probably 600 and plus people would be eligible in Concord. It would qualify for the income level. The income level to qualify in Concord is twice what's called a poverty level, and apparently they're calculating from the national rate, although it's higher, in this part of the country, but double that rate is approximately $50,000 per year family income.
Mhm.
And so that turns out to be, if you say that approximately 10% of Concord is on that level, it's somewhere in that vicinity. If my math was right, that says that you're going to get quite a bit of money per month paid by the government for, that service. And obviously that money is paying for, all of the costs for, the marginal value of whatever it costs to provide the service, but anything that's, above the marginal value can be applied for capital expenditures. And, that turns out to be at least one, bucket of money that, it's not going to build 100 miles of a conduit, but, certainly it's going to provide for, low-cost service.
I think what's really encouraging about that is that if there was the ability to make the capital expenditures that are necessary to be able to serve the premises that these people are living in, then the federal funding that comes with the program would suggest that at least it would be break even once that was done. So I would, tell me if you think I'm wrong about this, but it seems to me that sort of implies that if there's a one-time expenditure, an investment to get to these people and offer them the service, then that program will create enough ongoing funding to at least mean that the system's not losing money supporting that, and would potentially allow us to do things like, the increment, provide a good or better level of service. And it seems to me it's really consistent with things that Concord has done in the past to sort of enable people to get access to these programs without, because right now, if there's no fiber, we don't have any way to, we could want to deliver the program, but it's just not available to them. There's no investment for it. So it's.
Now that can apply to both Comcast and any other internet service provider that's operating.
Yeah.
And what Concord Light Broadband would need to do is they do need to apply to participate in that program. But as far as I know, it's still open because there are several municipal light plants in Massachusetts. And I think Carlin had tracked down a list, and I've tracked down a list. And there's a number that do participate in the program, so their customers can participate in that ongoing subsidy. And in fact, that subsidy is slated to go on indefinitely. And there's good reasons for that, because it's targeted at, in addition, even to relatively prosperous urban areas, to rural areas where, they do have no other internet service. And that has broad support, across party lines.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of rural states that, are primarily conservative and don't like the government to spend money, but it's kind of like the post office, If the post office shuts down on Saturday,
Yeah.
they're upset. And it's going to be the same thing with internet service.
Yeah, so I think really, regardless of whether ARPA would be nice as an accelerator, but it seems to me that what we're identifying is a particular population that falls under the condition of not being served by the fiber network today, that it would be particularly appropriate to try to plan a solution for. It's not necessarily going to be economically, the best case is economic break even, I think, over a long period of time. But I think that that's, there's real reason to propose that there should be policy in this area to support some of the other goals, which is, support for those that need it, and particularly the disadvantaged populations. And so I think regardless, ARPA is nice because it focuses us on a time frame of doing something quickly. But I think that regardless of that program, we should probably be addressing this in our recommendations, if you guys agree.
Well, I was,
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
go ahead,
Vince.
Gail.
Thanks. No, I mean, I think that this is a great idea, and I believe it's called the Affordable Connectivity Program. That's the new name for emergency
yeah.
broadband benefit. But what if none of these people would want broadband? Is that a consideration? I mean, is it just that they don't know about it, which it wouldn't surprise me, that 175 of those folks just probably aren't really even aware that it's an option. But would we, I don't know.
That's a very good point. And I've had some experience, and it is hard in some cases to even get people to sign up for something that's free. And in particular, internet service. The main headache for most people is that it's very hard to give up one service like Comcast and start another service, because particularly if you have family members, you have all of your settings, everybody's got their own profile, they've got passwords and logins to everything. And it's really a headache, just to do simple things like transferring your contact list. And
I'd go in two places there. First, I think that if we connected the availability to provide service in this way to the development of affordable housing units, for example, such that it's already present when whoever moves in or they change hands, that's a powerful thing, because it suddenly is available there. The other thing that it's always been part of my vision of what the fiber network could do for us is, as soon as you start potentially talking about particularly families, if you put the fiber in, that literally provides a piece of connectivity that can connect that residential unit directly to the school itself. So now you have the ability to potentially do some really important things, in the education program that could support families, which may be available to anybody that does that. But we need to start thinking about the fact that the fiber network isn't necessarily just internet service. We already talked about how it includes support for public safety. It can provide, virtually unlimited bandwidth for private uses, including private public uses, meaning things like supporting the school district and to the extent that any kind of virtual learning is useful, or there's just a whole host of services that can potentially be delivered in the areas of sustainability once that fiber is already in there. So it just seems to me that especially town-owned, town-sponsored affordable housing units should just automatically be wired. There should, then if somebody really wants something else, then fine, but the offer can be pretty attractive. There's nothing
some communities have done that. Longmont, Colorado, provides a free internet service in certain specific sectors. For instance, they provide free internet service to anybody that's in public housing. And to people in nursing homes, I believe, to a couple of other senior categories, to the schools, obviously. And I assume what they've done in that case is just to go ahead and wire the location, basically 100%.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also several silos of ARPA money that are targeted at certain use cases. So for instance, even relative to education, there's a kind of a special silo of money that's targeted at STEM education and STEM facilities and STEM infrastructure. So, you know, that may potentially be an opportunity for the middle school budget in terms of making sure that they have a very great STEM lab
Yeah.
that goes along with that. And the same is true of certain senior categories, because for particularly forms of telehealth, and it's pretty clear in telehealth that that's going to benefit in the future greatly by symmetrical speed,
Yeah.
doing the upload that's fast enough to support, kind of real-time video, doctor interviewing with patients that, are at home, to have their appointments.
Good. Thank you, Vince. The last category that occurred to me, along this line of what we might do to support construction of the fiber network is whether or not we might propose that either ARPA money or some other funding be set up for to funds for low-income construction loans or low or no interest construction loans for multi-dwelling, affordable housing, or not-for-profits, or even for economic vitality perspective. So the idea there being, situations where there's a significant investment either for an apartment building or a condominium complex or something like that, that needs to do that. Maybe there's a way to either bake that into, create either a loan that pays for that, or possibly even look at the longer term returns on simply making that investment and getting the, recovering it through the revenue that comes from the customer. And thinking about that a little bit more, it occurred to me that one way to try to decide whether that might work is to look at the churn, look at the turnover. So we now have, about seven or 8 years now of data on broadband customers. The perception is that the customer turnover is very low. So, if you're trying to do a payback analysis on how much can you spend to get into a customer account, if it turns out that our customers once acquired, sort of don't leave forever, that might mean that the utility could afford to pay a little bit more to acquire that customer in the first place, based on a reasonable expectation that will be recovered over time. I think we have many customers who, once connected, simply never left. And part of it is the policies of not raising the rates, but raising the service levels over time. It's just, if your internet bill never changes, it's kind of like a mortgage. After 10 or 15 years, it starts to seem a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
So those were some of the, kind of building on that proposal that I had floated the other day. Those were some of my further thoughts on it. So I don't know if anybody else has anything they've been working on that they want to share at tonight's meeting, but that's kind of what I brought for today. Okay.
Mark, I don't know if now is a good time, but I guess it's sort of related to the multi-dwelling. That email that you sent about the FCC's new,
Oh yeah.
I don't know, pronouncement. I don't know. I forget what legal mechanism it is, but about competition or basically like not allowing exclusive arrangements for internet provider. I don't know if I have the right terms that I'm throwing out there.
So it's the FCC engages in a fair amount of rule making And so as I understand it, what they're doing is updating their rules to give tenants and in apartments and office buildings more transparency, competition, and choice. So that was announced the day before yesterday. And I distributed some information on it. And the FCC, for those of us that have followed it or dealt with it because of telecommunications industry, is a politically appointed body, and it tends to shift a little bit in terms of what it's supporting on a policy and through its rules based on the administration that appoints the FCC commissioners. And so this is kind of, picking up on the conversation we had the other day about the fact that in those third-party conditions, landlords or property owners are in effect being prohibited now from making exclusive marketing deals or receiving payments from particular internet providers or cable providers that would preclude the residents of those buildings from getting services from alternate and competitive services. So they think that this is something that has been kind of a long time coming, but it does support. It's a declaratory ruling that, and it goes specifically to inside wiring. And there were some of these arrangements, so it's worth knowing that we should have access there. I see Carlin has her hand raised, and I'm going to defer to her because she's she is more expert in this than I am. So
I don't know about that. I just want to make sure I understand which order you're talking about. I'm looking at one that's dated released February 15.
yes,
Or an order and a declaratory ruling, GN docket number 17-142, improving competitive broadband access to multiple tenant environments. Is that the one you're talking about? It's about a 49-page document, FCC 22-12.
yes,
Okay, good. Okay, now I know which one you're talking about. Thanks.
yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So
So
I
about-
guess, go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead, Gil.
I was wondering, is there some action that could be taken or should be taken to, how does this get implemented? I guess if Concord Light Broadband wanted to go into a building, you just tell the owner, well, you can't tell me not to, but how does it, I don't know, maybe you don't, I don't know if you know the answer, but it makes sense for things going forward when a building is being constructed. Then you gave the example of that starts with a W, Warner something.
Yeah,
That was the
actually,
situation there.
I went back. I was driving along Conant Street today. It's Concord Commons, I think, is what it's called, and the address is on the sign was, I think, 94 Conant Street. But
Okay.
that was converted from a light industrial building. I think they were a door factory or something like that, to residential apartment buildings some years ago, around the time when we were kind of getting started. And I remember making a call to somebody who was involved in the project and saying, would you like us to install fiber, to your building so that you could potentially have access? Because we were literally right outside the building on the street anyway. So, and at that point I was informed that there had been an arrangement, and we can't categorize it exactly, but with the cable company that was in exchange for wiring the building, they were also being allowed exclusive marketing rights. And so, as people started to move into that building, they just didn't have choice. So I think that there's no doubt about the fact that this FCC ruling would make that sort of thing, I don't know if illegal is the right word, but
Prohibited.
prohibited is good. Thank you. but it doesn't quite get us over the hump. It doesn't also say, well, okay, who's going to pay to actually put the fiber in there? It's one thing for the deal to be prohibited. It's another thing we'd still have to, we'd be in this position, and I think that we're going to end up advocating for it, that, one way or the other, Concord Light Broadband needs to start to invest and come up with a framework for understanding when it's appropriate to invest in order to get to those types of customers. But yeah, clearly there's movement in that direction, and I think there aren't probably that many situations like that in Concord, but that just happens to be one that it may be long enough ago now that it's no longer enforced. So I don't want to be construed as bashing any particular
If the new rules or proposed new rules about affordable housing by right legislation that would make it, which would affect both areas around both train depots in Concord, that in an area of, I guess, 50 acres, there's a region where basically builders can build pretty high and pretty dense, and the town wouldn't have the ability to prevent it or even influence the, but anyway, there may be an opportunity there if we, using this rule, or maybe something that the town could impose, say that, look, you can't, you're putting in this new affordable housing, you're going to have to allow us to provide, or us and Comcast provide service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's, the fundamental thing, I think, is I firmly believe that consumers get better service when they have legitimate competitive choices. I'm not, far be it for me to try to prescribe that anybody has to take the Concord Light Broadband service. I just believe that if they have a choice between the two, they'll pick the one that is most appropriate to their needs. And I believe that the Concord Light service can be competitive in that framework.
Yeah.
It keeps everybody honest. Okay. I think I'm sort of ready to move on to, unless there's something else. That was a good point, Gail. Thank you for bringing that one up. Anything else before we move on to sort of next steps and maybe housekeeping along those lines? I'm just going to check my prep notes to make sure that I kind of got to. Yeah. I think, so suggestions for next steps in the next meeting. We'll obviously keep on pushing our data requests and try and deal with them as they come forward. And we'll talk more about whether we can get something concrete for the roads program. I was thinking that it makes sense for us to really think we might almost want to work backwards, like think about the things that we want to recommend and then consider how to build out a rationale for those recommendations and what needs to be in place to support them. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, so just maybe come up with a list of recommendations that we've discussed and figure out how to flesh those out.
Right.
That's a good idea.
I think some of them, like, marketing the service more directly and, are fairly straightforward, but I think that a program for that makes sense to do. And things like trying to understand what is the right amount of capital program to be supported on an ongoing basis is going to end up having to be something that I think staff is going to have to work on, but I think coming up with some broad parameters of what goals they should be. Because if we if we were presenting to the light board, we could say to them, these, based on our recommendations, we think you should adopt goals in these areas. Whatever they are, undergrounding, new installations, marketing, and so forth, and what the key performance indicators are for those things, and then try to back into how they might make that an operational recommendation. So that's kind of what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's maybe we're trying to push back a little bit against an early return of capital. Like you guys, you're not done yet.
Yeah.
And anyway, things like that, because there's a temptation to call it done and then turn it into basically a dividend creating thing. And anyway, I don't think they're done yet.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit in that area. And then I think also some of the things that we've been talking about how to support, the diversity, equity, and inclusion elements, and some of the things that have played into the ARPA discussion, I think are really useful things to frame and target towards an audience like the select board, like the finance committee, the high level policy thinkers of the town, even groups that are involved in sustainability, to make sure that they understand why it is that there's that there are some real synergies that are created by pushing the fiber network forward and taking advantage of it to use it in these ways. And I think some contribution like that, in my perfect world, works its way into something like Envision Concord over time. You envision a highly connected community that has access to these telecommunications facilities that make all these other things possible. Microgrids and whatever those things are. And by sort of framing some of it aspirationally that way, those kinds of things can go into that and be accepted to the thinking for the other folks that do various long-range plans. Because I think we are talking about a long-range plan. I don't think none of this gets done overnight. There still is, I think, significant work to be done in there, but it is time to take the next step. The reason that things like broadband essentials weren't available is there just wasn't the real capability to deliver on them, and there still isn't in some levels, but I think it can be with a little focus. All right. Are we ready for some public comments? Okay. Carlin beat you with her hand up, Terry, so I'll let her go first.
Oh, that's choice. Carlin Reed, 83 Woodson, very quickly. Will the telecom director position be advertised soon? It might be more of a question for Jason if he's paying attention, but if not, I'm just curious to find out what the status of that is. Thanks.
I don't have any information on that right now, but that's something that I'm sure we'll brief the light board on at the next meeting.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Jason. Terry.
I have a number of comments and a question.
Mhm.
I'm really excited to see Jason here. I think that's going to be a really big help, linking up this committee with staff. And congratulations, Jason, on your new role. That'll be great. I like a lot of what I heard tonight about going across silos, again, working with the public works people, the undergrounding, doing both fiber and the electric. All of those ways of looking past silos are great. And just, a lot of what you were talking about, $1 million a mile and it's going to cost so much and everything. And ARPA is only 5 million, but it's still a unique opportunity to start doing some of these things that we didn't have that opportunity before. Also, don't forget about the infrastructure bill, where we'll be receiving more money. And the other part of ARPA where we can apply directly for a specific project, in addition to the 5.6 million. And so just all the creativity and the ideas you have are great. And I really like Vincent's comment. As far as I knew, the biggest obstacle in our household and many of our neighbors to coming on to fiber through the town was exactly what Vince said. The incredible complexity of moving from Comcast and trying to figure out how to do all of that. And we've talked about this before at these meetings. And any way that you can help folks and explain how to do some of those things, I think I think that's a great big barrier to subscriptions. I really do. Because for years we wanted to do it. And finally, when we both retired, we said, that's when we're going to do it. We have time. And it was a 6 to 9 month project.
Yeah.
It was a really big project at our house to get it all straightened out. And my question is, on your report, you're going to be making a lot of recommendations. Will you also be recommending how to fund these recommendations, or do you see that as a separate thing?
I think it's important for us to at least put forward some potential options for funding. So for example, fiber construction to be incorporated with the roads program needs a funding source. I know that we talked about ARPA might be able to seed it, but it needs to be replenished, probably, most likely through broadband revenues, and suggesting a level of that. So there's how, and then there's also how, in the sense that we have the road repair revolving fund, which takes in monies from people who cut up the roads and gets a town meeting allocation, and that's a little cumbersome for town meeting. I know that when we talked about this at the last light board meeting a little bit, the director suggested, well, why not just fund it out of depreciation, which would make it an internal to the budget thing. So I think that the real question about how to fund it also is wrapped up in how much visibility and where are the policy goals set for that. Because if it's got visibility at the light board level, for example, or the town meeting level, or wherever, depending on how it's set up, that could. So I think we should at least take a stab at doing two things. We should try to identify as many of the possibilities as possible, and then I think we should put our finger on the scale and say we think that, as a starting point, probably this option might be a little bit more effective than that option, and then I think after that it becomes up to the normal, especially financial policy setting boards, to either concur or make another suggestion.
Right. I think you've got operating versus capital, then you've got enterprise fund issues, and then you've got issues about equity. Some people who are already customers have paid that $200 or whatever it was to have that installation, but now maybe under an DEI type policy, under ARPA or whatever, you want to subsidize that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know how this committee is going to come out on that question, but I think it's a very big question.
Mm-hmm. It is a big question. And I think there's also, it's also useful where possible to draw parallels to the things that we do. For example, we have some overlay accounts that help us where we have the, senior discounts for, on their tax assessments. What do we really do with that? Actually, everybody else just, takes up the slack for those people who qualify, and that could be acceptable. And again, it's also helpful if there's a way to sort of seed it so that it doesn't become a big one-time hit going in. I think all of those are possibilities. And I think if we can sort of point the way through where some of these discussions might go, then the normal policy-making bodies are the ones that actually get to decide.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you, Terry. Thanks for
thank
being.
you.
Vince, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that I sent you an email just before the meeting.
Mhm.
And it's an update of email I sent around back in September about the automated keeping of the minutes. And just to summarize very briefly, what it is there are some third-party services back in September that were basically doing an automated transcription of any meeting, whether it was on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or anything else. And they were getting very good at it. There has always been a kind of a transcript feature in Zoom, but until about 2 months ago, it was basically gibberish. You know, there was such a low level of speech-to-text recognition that you could hardly tell what was going on. But since then, they've actually contracted with this third-party service, which is called Otter, OTTER AI. And I'd say that the speech-to-text recognition is probably 95% now. But anyway, so what I've sent was just a proposal that, you know, again, was kind of an update of last September when things didn't work very well. And it just shows how fast things progress. To take a look at this, and whomever is doing the minutes for tonight, take a look at it, see what you think, try it out. And Gordon, I know you had mentioned the same situation over at the light board.
Yeah.
And I forgot if I copied you on it, but I know that we had a brief conversation, again, I think it was last September, that you tried over on the light board too, because I know that you have a kind of a rotating clerk situation over there too, in the same sense. So there's one difference. The transcript that you can get, and I gave the instructions for it in the email that I just sent, is probably 70 or 80 pages long. And that's partly because of the format they use. They have a timestamp. They have the name of the person that you know, is talking. And because of that, you know, there's a lot of extra space. So it looks very different than a typical minutes keeping narrative. Now, what I've done since I'm clerk of PEG Access this term is I've just taken that as the reference point for, you know, doing a traditional set of narrative minutes. And I think I started out at 3 pages and I tried to get it down to 2 pages. I think it can be done in 1 page, but take a look at that, give me a call and I can kind of describe, you know, the workflow that I've been using. And I think maybe between us, you know, on all 3 committees, we can come up with something that makes sense and kind of looks like the existing narrative style of minutes keeping that's being used, but still meets the requirements. And at this point, these electronic records keeping things are so new that you know, there's no rules or milestones to go by.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be very long before, and I think Mark mentioned this some time ago, there's going to be it's going to be completely automatic in a few more years, believe it or not.
Hope so.
Yeah. It's clearly a useful capability, and I think we should explore it. Certainly, my opinion is the use of Zoom and the ability to record these meetings, and frankly, you know, catch up on the ones that you can't necessarily be there in person is really, really invaluable. You know, I mentioned earlier in this meeting that I got a ton out of listening to the discussion that the select board had about the ARPA funds. And just, I made a note, that was about 1 hour into that meeting, by the way. So if you pick up on Monday night's recording and wanna see how that goes, and I think it goes on for 20 minutes or so, but it was a really good discussion. I think it, this is clearly just like everything else in the last 2 years, uncharted territory for most of us. But I think one of the real advantages that we have in this community is the ability to have some very constructive dialogues. And frankly, every time I go to somebody's committee, I'm like, I should go to them all the time. But I don't know.
Well, 3 hours is a lot to wade through, particularly.
Yeah.
Some of the meetings seem to go on for quite a while these days, but
Right.
there's a kind of a corollary to this in that YouTube
Mhm.
is substantially increasing the accessibility
Yes.
of a Zoom meeting once it's posted to YouTube. The latest thing that they've started doing, this is only within the past few months, is that they've started generating something called automatic chapters.
Yes.
So for instance, if you have an agenda, and I haven't seen it yet for a public meeting, but I've seen it for many things like people that are listing recipes, is they will break each item of the agenda into a chapter.
Yeah.
And you can navigate almost immediately to that chapter. And what they also do in context with that is that they make it searchable. So in theory, pretty soon, if you want to find out everything that Gail has commented upon, or every meeting in addition to the school committee and wherever else you may be sitting in on a meeting, you'll be able to search for Gail Hire and it will come up.
Great.
Which is a little bit frightening in a way, but
Yeah. Best behavior, Gail.
I know. I came across randomly a headline about Otter AI. Some journalist had interviewed, I don't know, somebody who's like a controversial figure in the Middle East. And they got a call from Otter saying, why were you interviewing this person? What is this about? And it was just the company. And I forget why, if this was like a banned person, but I don't know. So that raised some alarms. But I mean, I guess these are public meetings, so it's a little bit different than just, a journalist doing their job and trying to get news.
Well,
Keep it private.
yeah. Well, it certainly is a good tool to look at. So I thank you for bringing it forward again, Vince. I know we haven't used it yet, but I think it's worth a try.
Yeah.
Okay. If not, I guess you need to I could take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, and Gail, I could take a second.
I'll second it.
All right. And unless there's further discussion, Gordon,
Aye.
Gail,
Aye.
and myself, Mark Howell, aye. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. And I know we all hope that David's feeling better soon. And we'll
Yeah.
see you next week.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.